All right, I believe we're live. My episodic live stream slash YouTube channel continues, proceeds apace. I'll I'll wait for a couple of people to trickle in. I don't know how many people are looking at YouTube at this hour, but I'll just wait for a few people to come by. And I just want to do a follow up to my previous video about, hey Alejandro, good to see you, about new roof pass that De, De Blasio has initiated on his way out the door. And it's sort of the perfect coda to the worst mayoral administration in the city's history. Maybe not New York City's history, but definitely in recent memory. And people debate this all the time. I lived through as a young as a kid and a young man towards the very end of the David Dinkins administration. And up until that point, he was considered the nadir of New York City mayors. He was he was a he actually was a nice guy. He sort of reminded people of Jimmy Carter in a way, a very affable, very dignified. That's one of the things. I think that's one of the distinctions between David Dinkins and Bill de Blasio. De Blasio is just a vulgar limousine Marxist who is devoid of class. Yeah, wacky New York indeed. Hi, Irene. He's devoid of class, and he's sort of. If you ever read the history of the early Bolsheviks and the Marxists, and it's sort of similar to the National Socialist Party in Germany, you get a sense of people that are just the grossest, most vulgar, uncouth human beings. And caviar communist, yeah, that's another good epithet. Caviar communist. But yeah, basically this guy who is a creature of the state, he's bankrolled by not even small homeowners or landlords, but big real estate lobbies. And he was installed in office by these special government largesse. And Dinkins, even though he was also sort of a creature of he was a creature of the Democratic Party machine, the Percy Sutton machine in Manhattan, just like Charlie Rangel and a lot of other prominent African American Democrat office holders during the 60s and 70s and 80s. He was sort of the culmination of that when he was elected the first black mayor of New York City. And even though he was sort of an outgrowth of the Democratic Party machine, albeit a newer version, he had a certain dignity and class that is completely absent from the current crop of Democrat incumbents who were tasteless in every way. So, I mean, there's that, but there's also there are other aspects. I mean, Dinkins was there at what most New Yorkers consider the bottom of New York City. Over 2,000 murders, racial and civic unrest, race riots, and it was sort of it wasn't the low point. I mean, the low point was probably when New York City was on the verge of bankruptcy during the Beam administration, but it was definitely one of the low points of New York City history up until now, when Bill de Blasio assumed office, again, at the behest of sort of a coalition of, I hate to say this term, but basically a coalition of the venal and the stupid. So he was put into office to serve the interests of, you know, the real estate lobby and other lobbies that were dependent on government largesse and favorable from municipal bureaucrats, and also to institute a whole range of culture war, um, religious war items on the current agenda of the Democratic Party. Hi, Christine. You saw this during the Dinkins era as well, but it was, you can only describe it as more subdued than now. Now the mask is completely off. There was Joseph Fernandez, who was a board of education administrator back then in the early '90s, who introduced the rainbow curriculum, and it was basically a curriculum designed to normalize and mainstream LGBT indoctrination. So it was passed off as a as a tolerance gambit, teaching students how to be kind to other kids, but it really was the first real effort at introducing gay rights camp activism into the school system. And he was basically driven from his position by parent outrage, outpouring of parent activism. Now, fast forward to about 3 decades later, under De Blasio, you have someone who occupies more or less the same position, and there have been changes to the Board of Ed since then. The Board of Ed doesn't exist as such, but basically the guy who occupies that, what would have been that position, Richard Carranza, is an out and out racist. He's a one of these Aslan, La Raza types, and he instituted a series of changes that were basically designed to do away with any sort of meritocracy in the education system. And he left office eventually, but the mayor had no compunction about keeping this guy on for years, for I think over a year or 2 years. This guy was in charge of education, despite the fact that he openly backed discriminatory measures against Asian, primarily Asian, but also to a lesser extent white students at these quote unquote gifted schools, places like Stuyvesant or Bronx High School Science, Brooklyn Tech. These are local high schools. They're New York City high schools that you have to pass an exam in order to attend, and you have to qualify academically. And he thought this was discriminating against non-Asian minorities in New York City, so he tried to do away with them. And this guy is the typical bureaucrat that you see appointed in the modern era if you elect Democrats to office. And it's sort of a reflection of it's a reflection of where society is, but really where the Democratic Party in the 21st century is. The idea of a moderate Democrat, like the ones that pushed back against the rainbow curriculum and some of the more obnoxious features of the Dinkins administration, that's a concept that's completely disappeared. And as a result, you see de Blasio running untrammeled over New York City and New York City voters, even the ones who didn't vote for him. So the parting gift was this edict that mandates basically mandates vaccination if you want to eat, if you want to dine in, quote unquote. So presumably, hey GW, presumably if you want to get a Big Mac, not that you would, but if you want to get a Big Mac, or you want to stop at Chick-fil-A, or you're basically walking around Manhattan for 2 hours and you want to get a bite to eat, you can't after August 16th. If you haven't had an experimental vaccine, a non FDA approved vaccine injected into your into your body. And in order to get an idea of why this is, and there have been debates about how successful this would be. Let me see if I can click on that. Thanks, GW. I was looking for that. There have been debates about whether or not this will be successful. A lot of people just chalk this up to a lame duck mayor throwing out this unenforceable decree that the New York City, what constitutes the New York City electorate. There's a website called Typical. It's a microblog owned by a journalistic conglomerate that focuses primarily on New York City and the 5 boroughs. And if you read the comment section to some of the articles posted on that site, particularly related to something like this, the vaccine, you see people who are eager to embrace being human livestock. And I'm not exaggerating. Oh, it's buffering. Don't. It's okay. I'm gonna have to continue. I see. Sometimes I see disruptions on my end, so I know that the stream cut out. But most of the time, when people say it's buffering, I can't see anything. So I just have to go on viewer feedback. Hopefully it's. I'll just continue. Hopefully it was a momentary interruption. Yeah, Bill Clinton. He was a loathsome character in a lot of respects, and he definitely abused the power of his office. But one of the things he was able to do was to understand that you needed to triangulate if you were going to attain power, that the Democratic Party platform wasn't palatable enough to a broad enough section of the public in order to acquire power if it didn't moderate its position on certain subjects. Okay, choppy. Okay, so I think we can push through that. Hi, Chad. Thanks, Alejandro. But yeah, that's one thing. And going back to my point, my earlier point, if you look at these, you see people who are eager to be essentially human livestock. They have no concern about. It's ironic. Someone posted a meme the other day, which cuts to the heart of the matter, and it was a meme that goes, "Look how quickly Punch a Nazi became Show Me Papers," and it's a great illustration of the evolution of this mindset and the mercurial nature of the progressive mindset. It's not tied to any hard and fixed principles. It's tied to the accumulation and retention of power. So whatever the state wants at any particular period of time, that's the thing that you have to abide by. Yeah, that's true about Curtis Lewa. So basically, and a good example of this is an exchange that Sam Harris had. I mentioned this in the last live stream, but the co-hosts of Trigonometry, one of them posted this great Twitter thread where he points out all of the things that the government and academia and the science, quote unquote, has lied to you about over the past 4 years. And he went down this list point by point. And the upshot was, and this was the last tweet in the thread, he says, well, don't you think people have a right to be a little bit hesitant about this vaccine, considering all the other things that they've been lied to about and that have proven to be false over the past 5 years? So, in response to the Sam Harris, the atheist gadfly, he partially concedes his point by acknowledging that, yes, well, these are fallible institutions and they've had these issues in the past, but we still have to trust the institution. I think he actually used that phrase. Hi, Liza. He actually used that phrase, trust the institutions, and he gave no support whatsoever for this assertion. And it's kind of ironic when you look at Sam Harris. Here's a person who's not only unwilling, but he absolutely abhors the idea of trusting the Bible, the infallible, inerrant word of God, the inspired word of a holy God who's perfect, yet he's willing to invest all of his trust based on nothing more than the pronouncements of very dubious individuals like Anthony Fauci. He's willing to put all of his trust in these institutions that already have been proven to be trash. Like these are built on a foundation of sand, not even clay, of sand, and he's willing to trust them. So it's kind of ironic. That's a good question. Is he still relevant? I don't think so. I think the new atheists, their power has, particularly since Christopher Hitchens died, but also I think ever since the Atheism Plus and the social justice warriors took over atheism, the new atheists have been consigned to they've been put on the back burner. And I think Sam Harris tried to regain some of his momentum by being militantly anti-Trump. But now that Trump is gone, he's sort of lost that footing. But to just sum up, this idea is ubiquitous in New York, unfortunately, and I think there is going to be some resistance. Again, we'll see. This isn't really going to be forced. You might see it. Technically, they're not. The city isn't going to go around the Stasi that the city has established to probe into mid-September. So there's a lag time. One of the reasons I think this was rolled out at the time that it was is because right now, up until October, maybe mid-October to late October, you can still dine out ease. The temperatures won't start dropping to the point where you actually have to move indoors until sometime in October. So there's a good 2.5 months. There's a 2.5 month grace period where people will be able to bypass the vaccine passport enforcers. But eventually, assuming this is not repealed in the interim, we're going to see that's going to be where the rubber meets the road. We'll see how this is enforced and what the public response is to it. But I am not optimistic based on the reactions of New Yorkers, even the reactions, even the compliance they've shown with compulsory masking over the past year and a half, and the seeming power and entitlement it gives people, particularly people that consider themselves powerless. It gives them the authority. They've sort of been deputized to be hall monitors, and you you see this, the type of people who become librarians and fake police officers or security guards. These are the type of people that adore this, and that mentality is actually pretty widespread in New York City. Yeah, I don't know about the Adams thing. It seems kind of fishy, but the whole thing, I don't even know if he was actually a beat cop. Like the way whenever he says that he has all of these commendations, but from the 2000s, when right prior to him becoming the Brooklyn Borough president, the only thing I remember him is being associated with the Vulcan Society, which is an African American fraternal order within the New York Police Department. But I remember him being associated with press conferences, basically whenever there was a police shooting, something, or an instance of police brutality, something like the Abner Louimer case or Amadou Diallo, he would hold press conferences. So I don't know what actual experience. I mean, there are a lot of cops. People don't want to admit this, but there are a lot of cops who don't spend a day and who are basically paper pushers, and they're expert bureaucrats. They're not. It's not the image that Hollywood portrays of the beat cop just running down a perp or, disarming someone with a machete and throwing them in the paddy wagon. I mean, yeah, that does happen. That does happen, but there are also cops whose entire career is spent without exposing themselves to the slightest harm, who are basically pencil pushers. I mean, that's the impression I get from Eric Adams. Again, I would have to investigate to actually know whether or not that's true, whether or not he actually had a hand. The weird thing is the Eric Adams video, that viral video he put out, what basically shows parents how to find drugs and weapons in their child's room, and it's kind of hilarious when you look at it. He's pulling Uzis out of a bookshelf. It's kind of a silly video when you look at it, and he got clowned on the internet. But the library movie series. Yeah, the vaccination. The thing is, the vaccination program or passport, it really is creating two classes within society, and the rationale. And this goes to the heart of the stupidity of progressivism. Basically, their argument is that you can discriminate against someone, and it's correct as long as it doesn't fit a series of categories that would qualify as a protected class. So if you don't discriminate against someone based on their race, excluding Asian and white people apparently, but okay, but race or gender or sexual orientation, and there are 7 or 8, I think, in federal and it also applies on a city and state level in places like New York. But there's 8 or 9 different categories. I think one is race, sex. New York has sexual orientation. There are a few states that don't have that. So if you're a homosexual, you can't be discriminated against in in terms of jobs or real estate renting, things like that. I think one of the other is disability. Veteran status, I think, might be another one. But basically, there's a small list of classes which you can't discriminate against. And what the left is saying is essentially, as long as you don't fall into one of these narrow categories, you can be denied access to transportation, to entertainment, which again isn't a big deal. But even food, and that's going to be the next. I think that's going to be the next battleground, trying to ban people who are unvaccinated from things like grocery stores or supermarkets. And I think that's when we'll really see how this is going to unfold, because when the government is trying to starve people because they don't agree to get an invasive medical procedure, I think you're getting to the breaking point for. I mean, you're basically admitting that there's no distinction between what the U.S. is and what the People's Republic of China is. So, I mean, that'd be but that's the whole rationale for the or justification for these vaccine passports. Basically, you can be discriminated against and be denied access to all sorts of public accommodations, as long as it's done to further a non-racial, as long as it's done to further a program that is not discriminating against African Americans or Hispanics or homosexuals or another protected class. And it just illustrates the mind virus that is progressivism. It's basically saying you can be denied certain civil liberties and civil rights and constitutional rights based on the whim of the government, as long as you are not a member of a protected class, which is very bizarre. And well, I actually think there's actually a pretty interesting study that outlines vaccination rates and vaccination hesitancy. And I might, if I find it, I might post it in the comments. But basically, what they found is the groups that are with the highest rate of people, or the highest percentage of people who are getting vaccinated, at least recently within the past few months. I think the study was released this week, but the highest percentage of people getting vaccinations are Hispanic and Black Americans, and that I don't know if it's not the highest percentage in general, but just the highest percentage of people getting them now. It's not the highest vaccination rate, cumulatively, but the highest rate of people seeking out vaccinations. And one of the lowest rates is actually people who have, not looking at race, but looking at education level. One of the lowest rates is people who have PhDs. So people who have postgraduate and doctoral degrees, though, that is the lowest rate. And Tim Pool had an interesting observation. He said on his live stream, on his live stream the other day, he said, if you see that the people with the most education, who are presumably the most well informed about these sorts of issues, just by basis of reading, ingesting more news, if you see that group hesitant to get the vaccine, what makes you eager to get the vaccine? I mean, it's worth considering. But again, my I just think that the whole, it just comes down to this. This is something that is sort of a signpost on the way to, on to borrow phrase from Hayek, on the road to serfdom. It's sort of, it's it's one of those. Hi, Jonathan. It's one of those things that is a turning point where we're sort of like the national security and domestic security measures instituted after 9/11. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Most of the people that, and it's a bit of a generalization, but it's accurate. Most of the people getting the vaccination are the type who are, I would say, mid-level, white-collar professionals, people who would be journalists. That's Those are the type of people who are probably have the AstraZeneca and the Johnson and Johnson, who have been vaxxed at least 3 times, and or at least 2 times, and probably 3. I mean, living outside of Israel, where I think that the vaccinations, they're already on their 4th booster shot over there. But yeah, midwits. It's a Michael Malice a term he employs a lot. I don't know if he coined the term, but he uses that a lot. And it's an accurate description of a certain class of individuals who think that they know more than the general population, and who think that they know more than they actually do, who aren't aware of their own ignorance, their own limitations in knowledge. It's sort of like that Socratic adage, I think it was Socrates, where it basically, it's basically admission of your own ignorance. That's the only sign that you have some. Well, not the only sign. It's a marker of wisdom that you're willing to admit how ignorant you are of a vast area of knowledge, human knowledge. But yeah. So yeah, this is a signal. This is we're heading down a certain trajectory, kind of like after 9/11, and now people don't even question going to an airport and being invasively searched, having to be delayed indefinitely because of security measures, and even the NSA spying, the most intrusive spying into your personal lives. It's something that is mostly glossed over by the general population. And the past year and a half it's similar. It's similar to that. And the vaccine passport it's not the beginning, but it is not the end either. I think we're going to see more. If this is just complacently accepted, we're going to see more of this in the future. Anyway, thanks everyone. JP, GW, Chad, Christine, Alejandro, Liza. I'm grateful you all came, and I will see you next time.